Hello, I'm Joshua Gordon from the Sports Conflict Institute. We are live with SCI TV. Today I'm joined by David Steele of Sporting News. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
David, I always enjoy our conversations, and today will be no exception. I hope we could talk a bit about integrity issues in the NFL, and you've written a bit about this in recent times. Can you give a little outlay to our audience of what are some of the things that have been popping up?
Well, the biggest one I think is something everybody is very familiar with. I think if by this point you haven't heard the term Deflategate, then you probably have been maybe on a desert island, and maybe that's a good thing for you if you've been able to avoid all of that. But it's been very interesting because the NFL's investigation into whether the Patriots, who of course eventually end up winning the Super Bowl, tampered with the footballs during the AFC Championship game last year, has opened up kind of an entire can of worms about how the NFL handles discipline, what the relationships are between Roger Goodell and the owners, whether there's a lot of back scratching and back patting going on, whether the owners themselves are showing the sort of integrity that they demand of the players, and whether the entire system of discipline and justice that the NFL applies to players is being evenly metered out, and whether there's a double standard involving the league and its owners and teams. That conversation has been spun into all the other credibility questions that the NFL has sort of dug up, involving other franchises, the way that stadium operations take place, the way that other punishments take place. And it's really cast a pall on the NFL, and I can't even, I can't go much further without suggesting officiating, because they've been officiating controversies the last two Monday nights with the entire nation looking in on it. So there's a major credibility problem with the NFL in terms of whether they've shown the sort of integrity that they demand in order to keep their image pristine with the public. And they've clearly shown a lot of gaps in that credibility, and I think in my opinion, it's badly tarnishing the image of the entire sport.
So, David, for those who are tempted to think of it as just an isolated incident or two, can you give us a little bit more detail about some of the other things that have popped up? Some you've mentioned before, crowd noise, and some of these other issues that are going on as well.
Well, just this past week, the end of week 4 of the end of week 5 of the NFL. The Browns general manager, Ray Farmer, came back from a 4-week suspension handed down in the offseason because he was caught texting to the Browns sidelines during a game last season. The Atlanta Falcons, their front office was on punishment during the preseason, the early part of the regular season, because they pumped fake crowd noise into the Georgia Dome during games last year, during the big opening night prime time regular season game between the Steelers and the Patriots, where the Patriots received their championship rings and that sort of thing. The Steelers found out that their headset communication, which they use to communicate with the quarterback, somehow the transmission was being replaced by the Patriots radio play-by-play broadcast. So they weren't able to talk from the press box to the sidelines to the quarterback, and vice versa. They're hearing play-by-play radio there inside the stadium, and this is again something that the NFL has had all off season to consider. So in the wake of all of these, there are allegations and counter allegations. Even with Deflategate itself, the Patriots and others have pointed fingers at each other in terms of, well, look at what other teams have done with deflating footballs. Look at what they've done with the balls that are used for kicking during the game. Look at all these other violations that other teams have done and they've gotten away with. Is the NFL letting other teams get away with it? Are they really diligent about this? Is this something they take seriously? Are there vendettas being taken place, or are they just lax about the rules that they govern themselves with, while being particularly hard against player transgressions? So there have been a lot of really specific examples that, when you take them together as a whole, it really calls the NFL onto the carpet in terms of whether they are really serious about adhering to the letter of the law, imposing it properly and evenly, or if they're more interested in cutting corners, doing favors for each other, and pat each other on the back in a sense.
So what's your sense in terms of what tends to be driving this? It seems like an awful lot that's drawing into question the integrity of the product itself and what we're seeing on the field.
You know, what I get is a sense of entitlement by the league office and by the owners themselves. Because one thing you actually have to remember, Roger Goodell catches the overwhelming brunt of the criticism from the public because he's really been a pretty poor face for the league certainly over the last few years. When you look at terms of relations with the players, the way that he's handled, again, discipline, the way he's handled negotiations with people like the referees when they had the big lockout and they had to bring in basically a scab group of referees and that sort of thing. You know, a lot of the criticism has gone toward him, but he's still an employee of the owners. The owners still drive this entire thing. And when, you know, while it seems like there's a united front behind Roger Goodell, in reality, the owners engage in the same sort of backstabbing and backbiting that everybody else does. But overall, they've all created a sense of being untouchable, and it's really, in a sense, being fed by the public that never is willing to turn away, and they're willing to sort of continually watch the games, buy the merchandise, sort of feed the NFL financial machine and fill up its vaults. So the NFL is starting to get a sense that, hey, we can pretty much get away with anything we want, and it's not going to affect our bottom line. And it seems as if every decision that they make is driven by that same motivation. And if it happens at the league office level, it can't help but also be driven at the team level. And that's why you see teams continually pushing the envelope and seeing how much of an edge and what they can get away with, knowing that if they try it, they're probably going to get away with it because everybody knows that the other teams are probably doing something just as illegal and something just as crooked.
Now, are they wrong? And I asked this after the mishandling of the Ray Rice incident. We saw actually a growth in women viewers in the months afterwards when you look at some of the turnkey studies and everything else. So I guess they may be morally wrong, ethically wrong, but are they financially and business side wrong in terms of being untouchable?
Yeah, they can always point to the finances of it and say that, hey, we haven't gotten any feedback or any information that we're doing anything wrong, because if we were, people would turn away from us. And that certainly has been the case in other sports. Baseball has certainly suffered financially from the PED scandals from the last decade or so. There's a level of credibility that the fans no longer give them. They don't get the same benefit of the doubt, and that's reflected in attendance and in TV ratings and nationally and locally. The NBA has gone through the same sort of thing. They had the big referee scandal several years ago with Tim Donaghy being investigated by the FBI and eventually convicted for manipulating the calls in games. And the NBA absolutely took a hit financially and in terms of its perception by the fans, their customers. The NFL that hasn't happened yet. There have been certain downticks in attendance in some stadiums, but in others, there's still decades-long waiting lists for season tickets, and the ratings continue to go up. That very game in which they had the problem with the headsets with the Steelers and the radio play-by-play was the highest-rated Thursday night opener that the NFL has ever had. And again, this was after that entire offseason that was full of Deflategate. So the fans are not, in a sense, punishing the NFL for any sort of slips in its integrity or lack of credibility. And as long as that doesn't happen, then the NFL has zero incentive to change the way they're doing things.
Dare I ask, is it possible that even it's helping the league at all with the fans? Are they enjoying the water cooler fodder of some of the drama and debate and controversy?
I don't think that's out of line at all to think that. I think that the NFL understands that sort of buzz from fans helps them. It keeps the interest at an incredibly high level. If fans are sniping at each other about whether the Patriots are a bunch of cheaters, or if the Steelers are a bunch of cheaters, or if the Jets are ratting people out for Deflategate, or whether there are vendettas being sworn out between different teams, and whether everyone is going after the league itself, and if they hate Goodell and they bring signs to the game and wave them, talking about how terrible Roger Goodell is, they're still paying to get into the game and paying for parking, paying for concessions. They're still buying Red Zone and Sunday Ticket and all the jerseys and caps and big foam fingers and NFL logo grills and everything the league can possibly slap a logo onto. People are still buying up. So sure, yeah, I think the NFL has every reason to feel that way. And I get the sense that nothing is really going to change until they start feeling it in their pockets. I mean, you mentioned everything that's going on since the Ray Rice incident of the video and everything a year ago. There have been more women fans. They've sold women's NFL apparel. You know, they have not really gotten a hit except in public perception. But again, that has not affected their bottom line yet.
So is there anywhere that the NFL is vulnerable on these integrity issues right now?
You know, I think that at a certain point, if they continue to lose either in court or on appeal to the union, or if, say, Congress gets involved or something like that, it may start to wear on them. Because I think that most people who watch this stuff, they're convinced, okay, they can't keep skewing high forever with this. There has to be some sort of a tipping point, something that's going to push them over the edge. It just hasn't been the things that they thought it would be. I think when you see the NFL just get slapped down in court over how they handled Tom Brady's suspension connected with Deflategate, and yet all that's done is, again, drive more interest in the NFL and in anything involving the Patriots, then you start to think, well, what would have to happen? I mean, will a ref have to be caught openly fixing a game, or an owner caught paying somebody off or something like that? And obviously these are not open accusations, and I don't want the league's lawyers to come after me for anything like that, but it would have to be something at that level, because you would think that with everything that's going on, you know, something would have, you know, finally gotten the league's attention and said, we can't sustain this anymore. But I'll give you another example. You know, we would talk about ratings, attendance, things like that. The TV contracts have not gone down. None of the networks have said, we don't want a part of this. We don't want to be there when the whole thing comes crumbling down. The contracts continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And maybe that's what it's going to take if an ESPN or Fox or CBS say, this is not worth our investment, then maybe the NFL will wake up, because that's where their big cash cow is.
Yeah, it's funny. I always think about, every time we're talking about these kind of things, we're not talking about concussions and CTE and all of that. And any perspective on whether or not those things have any relationship whatsoever?
You know, it's interesting at that, because this movie Concussion is coming out sometime this fall or early winter. It's going to be coming out during the season. It's the Will Smith movie where he plays the doctor who discovered CTE in football players. The trailers came out. Again, the uproar was sort of reignited. All the dots were once again connected, and yet the reaction by really major segments of the public were, "Hey, that's football. Everyone stop crying, stop complaining, stop trying to so-called take the NFL down." The fan base still has a lot of rabid, passionate defenders of the NFL, and it seems like they're sort of dragging everybody along with it. And meanwhile, the people who are really offended by just the obvious health risks of playing football, and who are advocating turning away from it and diluting the NFL's influence over everybody on this sort of issue, they haven't come at it. They have not shown up in numbers big enough, again, to affect the NFL's bottom line. Maybe the movie, as weird as that sounds, that might be the tipping point. But, you know, historically, that hasn't been the case yet. You know, everyone is still waiting to see what's going to sort of knock the NFL out of its ivory tower.
Yeah. Any predictions? You want to put your Nostradamus hat on and predict what conversation we're going to be having 6 months from now on these issues of integrity?
You know, I think that what the trend is telling us right now, that there's going to be an officiating call so egregious, and it's going to happen in front of the biggest audience and have such an impact on this season that might be what we're talking about in terms of the blow that finally, weakens the NFL, that strikes it at its underbelly, because that is something that everybody is united in. Is it just that's a universal thing that goes back to the beginning of sports itself, is anger at the officials, all kill the umpire, all that sort of thing. I think that might be the thing, because there's an awful long history building up right now about what's going on with the NFL. That could sort of start the dominoes to really fall, and it could possibly take everything else down. Whether it happens this year, maybe during the playoffs, maybe during the Super Bowl, or it may happen sometime next year. But that, if I had to pick one thing that would sort of topple the whole tower, I think that it would be something like that. I don't want to think of anything even more extreme than that, because it's a little scary. But I think it would be something that would sort of strike at the emotions of the fans enough that they would finally start to turn away and say, this isn't worth the time, money, resource, and emotion that I've invested in this. So that could be what ends up knocking it all down.
Well, very interesting. I appreciate the thoughts on this, and hopefully this time and months ahead, we're talking about the NFL as a leader in integrity and all the changes they've made and systemic fixes. But I suspect we'll be talking about something slightly more on the controversy side as well.
I think you're right. Something tells this train is still heading in the same direction right now. It'll take a whole lot to turn it around. So something tells me this will still be a pretty timely topic next time we talk.
Great. Well, I appreciate you on the show as always, and look forward to our upcoming conversations again.
Thanks again, Josh, a lot. And I always enjoy being on.
Great. Be well.
Thank you. You too.